Hello, good evening. My name is Kirsten Schönefeld from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Belgrade. I would very much like to welcome you tonight to the opening of the exhibition Imagine Reflections on Peace, with a public interview with Ron Haviv. And first of all, I would like to ask my colleague Ralf Melzer, who is the director of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation's regional office in Sarajevo, to welcome us with a couple of words on this exhibition. It was also his initiative to bring this exhibition to Belgrade. So please, Ralf, if you would like to address us with some words.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kirsten, and good evening also from my side. It's really a great pleasure to express a warm welcome to all of you tonight and to open the Imagine Reflections on Peace exhibition here in Belgrade. Right at the beginning, I would like to thank our partners, Seventh Foundation and Forum ZFD, for the cooperation. And I would also like to thank all who contributed to make the exhibition and this event possible, in particular my colleagues Ivana Racic from our Belgrade office and my colleague Sasha Vasic from my team in Sarajevo. Thanks also to the Center for Cultural Decontamination for hosting us and for providing us with this really excellent and inspiring location. Almost 1 year ago, on the 22nd of April, and I'm sorry, I forgot to say hello to the most important person, Ron Haviv, and to Ambassador Konrad, German Ambassador to Belgrade. It's a pleasure to have you here among us, as well, all of you, so sorry for that start. Good to have you here. Okay, now back to last year. 22nd of April, I had the opportunity to join the opening of the Imagine exhibition at the National Museum in Sarajevo. And this was also the moment when the idea was born to bring these photos to other places in the region. We now succeeded to have the photos here in Belgrade, and I really think this is an important achievement and a statement. Journalism means, and here I'm quoting the Bosnian journalist Aida Cherkes, turning ignorance into a choice. The Imagine exhibition presents the works of Stephen Ferry, Ron Haviv, Gary Knight, Don McCullen, Roland Neveu, Gilles Perez, Jack Picone, and Nicole Sobetsky. They covered conflicts and wars in Colombia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Cambodia, Lebanon, Northern Ireland, and Rwanda. They risked their life, so no one could claim not to have known what was going on. Looking back to these wars, we clearly see how dealing with the past always means dealing with the present and the future. The depressing truth is history repeats itself. Not exactly, of course, it's the patterns that repeat themselves. The film footage from Sarajevo under siege in the 1990s, for example, which is screened in the Tunnel of War exhibition close to the airport runway in Sarajevo, tells us pretty much the same as the photos from Mariupol under fire, which we showed last year during the Sarajevo Film Festival. Sometimes there are moments when dealing with the past and dealing with the simultaneity of horror and our everyday life that goes on as usual is particularly unbearable. While we are standing here war continues in Ukraine, and journalists again are on the ground risking their lives. For 2022, the Reporters Without Borders annual report stated 57 journalists had been killed while doing their work. And in one day, in 5, 10, 20 or 30 years from now, people will get together somewhere in Europe and open a photo exhibition with pictures from Bucha, Mariupol or Bakhmut. In 2005, 30 years after the Khmer Rouge took power in Cambodia, I curated a photo exhibition for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. We called that project Cambodia, A Journey Through the Night. Back then, in my first year with Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, I was sent to the headquarters, from the headquarters to Phnom Penh to do the photo research at the documentation center of Cambodia and to visit the killing fields. And as if it was yesterday, I remember myself suddenly standing in the middle of the random, lively city of Phnom Penh after hours I spent with the pure horror of pictures of children, women, men tortured and killed. And it took me a moment, it took me a while to get along with the reality of the present. Christoph Maria Fröder, a German television journalist who, like Roland Neveu, was one of the few journalists who remained in Phnom Penh and who covered the Khmer Rouge takeover. And he describes himself not as a war reporter, but as a crisis reporter, similar, Ron, when you're saying you're covering conflicts. And I think this self-understanding really makes a difference. It brings to our attention first and foremost the suffering of the people, but also the crisis and the structures that led to the war and the actors who are responsible for that. The photos around us are not easy to take in, but precisely in that sense they are confronting us with the cruelty that is part of reality. The pictures in this exhibition do not simply reproduce the horror of war. They go much beyond of what they are documenting by also asking what this means for the construction of peace. They are indeed reflections on peace. I'm especially grateful that Ron Haviv, who covered the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina and co-founded the Seven Foundation, is with us tonight. Thanks, Ron, for having exclusively come from New York to Belgrade and for later sharing thoughts with us. I invite you tonight to reflect, to jointly reflect on peace here in the stirring city of Belgrade. And I ask you not to give up imagining peace and not to give up fighting for peace, regardless of all the backlashes the civilization is currently confronted with worldwide. We shall never give up turning ignorance into a choice. Or, in the words of Gary Knight, co-founder and director of the Seven Foundation, this is no time to turn our eyes away from tribalism, dogma, and extremism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ralf, for putting this into the broader picture and also for sharing your experience. I would like now to invite the Ambassador of Germany to Serbia, Her Excellency Anke Konrad, to address us also with some words and some reflections.
Yes, good evening. Hello. I would first also start with really very much thanking the Friedrich Ebert Foundation for this initiative, together with the Center for Cultural Decontamination. I'm also very happy to see that one of the photographers is with us today, so thank you very much for coming all the way from the States over. And yes, if we look at these pictures, I can, for my country, state that in Germany we hadn't had such pictures since the end of the Second World War. But I know that in countries where I'd been serving as a diplomat, but also here in the Balkans specifically, these pictures are not just pictures, but it's stories that other people have had their life experience of themselves. Those who were living in the 90s here in the region, those who had suffered on different sides, because victims were on all sides, those who had suffered the atrocities of war and have still a vivid imagination. And if we look at these photos, I mean, first we see different images of war, and as you've rightly stated, they look sometimes similar. But what is not similar is simply if we look at the people we see there, which have all had their own individual destiny, who had all their way of experiencing trauma and also their way out of trauma. And I think for these people it's important that their story is told, shown in pictures, not covered somewhere because it's not so pleasant a time. I think it's very important, and maybe these photographs also could stimulate us to simply talk about the time when these pictures were taken, to just reflect on what happened and why it happened, and to draw conclusions. And as we all know that such an exhibition cannot change people's mind. It will not prohibit wars, but it will raise more conscience and more of us, even those that have not experienced war by themselves, that we need to do everything so that war either doesn't even start or is ended as soon as possible, as we very much hope now will be the case for the Ukraine. And you know that we are working on this and that we are supporting Ukraine in this. So I invite everybody, when you're looking at the pictures, just reflect on what happened, even if it's a faraway country you've never been to, but simply think about the people that you see in these pictures. They are the ones that we should share our thoughts about for them, for their children and grandchildren. So thank you very much again for this initiative.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Conrad. So we have two more opening remarks before we go over to the public interview with Ron Haviv. First of all, we will have Natasha Govedarica from Forum Civil Peace Service, and then Ziad Ghafi from the Sevens Foundation addressing us. Thank you.
Hvala vam svima što ste večeras s nama. Vaš dolazak i interesovanje za ovu temu čitamo kao podršku našem radu. I would also use this opportunity to acknowledge your work, Ron, your commitment, your professionalism, your brave insisting on documenting facts of a horror of humanity, but also not for giving up dreaming peace and working for it. To je primjer koji želim da slijedimo u svom radu. Vjerujem da fotografije, osim kao dokaz, mogu poslužiti kao poziv da zamislimo živote koji su se vodili prije njih, poslije njih. Smatram da je važno da se na tom nivou, koji ne mora biti racionalan, povežemo i razumijemo da dijelimo svoju ljudsku prirodu i svoju ljudsku sudbinu. I wish us all to continue reflecting peace, working for peace, especially in this region which is continuously challenged with tensions and old animosities. Let's make our humble contribution persistently, and let's hope it will change our future to better. Thank you very much. Enjoy the conversation and exhibition. Zio, please join us.
Good evening. Dear Ambassador Conrad, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, I would like to, on behalf of the Seven Foundation and Seven Academy, to thank you all for coming. And I would also like to thank our wonderful partners who made this event possible. Kirsten Schönfeld, Director of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Serbia, Ralf Melzer, Director of Regional Office of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and Nataša Govedarica, the Country Director of Forum ZFT Serbia. It was actually challenging to bring an exhibit, Imagine, Reflections on Peace, to Belgrade. No space really wanted to touch it. And I would like to applaud and thank the Center for Cultural Decontamination for demonstrating once again their commitment to talking about difficult subjects others may want to bury by hosting this exhibition in their venue. For me personally, a Bosnian who grew up in Sarajevo when it was under the siege, eventually became a refugee and then spent the better part of 20 years covering various wars. The fact that only one organization was willing to host this work illustrates the state of peace in Balkans, and it is admittedly a little bit disheartening. How can examining how to make better peace possibly be controversial? When I was 16 and the Dayton Peace Agreement halted the war in my homeland, we told we got everything we could possibly ask for. And yet, in hindsight, I think we settled for the basic definition of peace, the absence of violence, and we didn't really give peace a chance. Now, nearly 30 years since the Dayton Peace Agreement, we can be honest with ourselves and admit that we all lost the war, but we also all lost the peace. Did our trauma and war experiences condition us to do so little? I really can't say, but while the guns are quiet, as we like to say in the Balkans, here now I do know that we have not done enough to demand more of the people who represent us, more of our neighbors, and much, much more of ourselves. So I invite you to immerse yourself in this, I cannot say, seminal, multifaceted work created by some of the finest contemporary photographers, writers, journalists, intellectuals, and policymakers, and join us in imagining that we can all individually, what we all can individually do to make a better peace for all of us. And on another note, we also made a book in electronic version in the Na jezdcima naroda I narodnosti. So I urge you to have a look for the link of the entire book in Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian. So thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
How it feels to come after, now it's 20 years from exhibition in Rex, or even more. And we are still in safe house of CZKD. How do you feel about that, if we are talking about peace now?
It's disappointing. I think it's a small symbol, but yet important one of a lack of progress, of understanding, accepting, and determining what the history is. I think this is an issue that is not only here in Serbia, but I think you can say the same for Kosovo, Bosnia, and Croatia, what exactly happened during the breakup of Yugoslavia. And until there's a determined and accepted historical acceptance, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to move forward. I think it's very difficult for a country to tell their own story when all of a sudden you come to a period of time when either you don't teach anything to your children, or it's so different than what their neighbors are learning that it's almost impossible to reconcile the differences.
Yeah, I started from the end because I felt when I was invited to talk with you that is actually a very good opportunity to reflect on what I think most of us feels about, 30 years of activism and where we are now. But let's go back to history. And it's not hard to find data of how you started and that your first assignment to Panama was very successful. But how you decided to be a photographer at the first place and then to become war photographer?
Oh, it's very simple. I went to university, had no idea what I wanted to grow up and be. All I knew was I wanted a job that would not have me in an office. So I thought photographer was one that meant I could travel. I had no nobility, no understanding of journalism, no understanding of photography. It was completely like, if I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing something, let's do it outside of fluorescent lights, elevators, and offices. But it was once I started to work as a journalist and understand the role that we play in communicating and participating along with you, the audience, in often helping make important decisions being made about our communities and beyond, then I started to understand that there was real value in this idea of contributing my small part as a visual journalist.
When you went to Panama for the first time, you were very young, and I assume that you were not really into what's really going on. How you become attached to stories, and it is quite a big sacrifice to be always on the first line. How you deal with that?
I'm not sure I look at it as a sacrifice. It's without question, it's a choice. I choose to go to these places, the people that are involved, that I'm documenting, it's often not their choice. So it's not something I look at the poor photographer sacrificing his or her time. I go there because I think that, one, the way that humanity has existed, the way that countries are created, the way that history is made is often during conflict. It's important that there's documentation of that, because often on the sidelines of a new country being born or dying are the innocent people whose voices need to be amplified. And it is our role as photographers, as journalists, to help their voices be heard. Excuse me, to help their voices be heard in order to hopefully make people's lives for the better. I have been so fortunate to witness history happening in front of me, and so privileged to show you, the world, my interpretation of that. I think it is, without question now, having done it for almost 40 years, it was just a very smart choice as a young photographer to do this. But I think also, when the photographs succeed, it shows that there can be impact, but more often than not, the photographs fail and don't change anything. And so that is that motivation to keep going back, to keep going to place. For me to spend 4 or 5 months in Ukraine last year and be going back again soon, that there's a role that our work plays, but it's a role that it plays in connection with everybody in this room and beyond.
You're preparing the movie about those two photographers, that one is Panama and the other is our Bielina. Could you tell us the story about Panama photography, because there was immediate reaction from the President Bush, and how you felt about that?
So we're currently, Lauren Walsh, my co-director, and I are currently finishing up a documentary called Biography of a Photo, where we're doing essentially a biography about two photographs, one from Panama in 1989, the other, the Bielina photograph, from 1992. And we're looking at basically the birth of each picture and their lives over the course of the last 30 or so years. Now, the Panamanian photograph was an image taken in 1989 when the dictator of Panama held an election, lost the election, nullified the election, and then had his paramilitary groups go out and violently beat up the would-be winners. And I took a photograph of the vice president-elect of Panama, covered in blood, being beaten by one of the dictator's paramilitary supporters. The photograph was on the cover of Time and Newsweek and many other newspapers and magazines around the world shortly after it was taken, and had kind of a big impact, but nothing really actually happened. But 7 months later, after the photograph was taken, the United States invaded Panama. And then U.S. President George Bush, in his speech to the American people on why the invasion was taking place, used the photograph as one of the justifications for the invasion. Wasn't the only reason, but he gave it as one of the reasons, probably the first time a photograph has been used to justify a military action. And when I understood that, it wasn't whether I agreed with the invasion or not, but when I understood that, I started to understand the power of photography. And then 3 years later, when I was in Bijeljina, and I took the photograph of Arkan's paramilitary group, the Tigers, during the first battle for Bosnia, actually before April 6th in Sarajevo, executing unarmed, middle-aged Muslim civilians. And that photograph was then also published around the world. And there was no reaction whatsoever. Nobody said anything, nobody talked about it, and so on. The war started and lasted for almost 4 years, with thousands being killed, millions becoming refugees, and then of course led to another war in Kosovo and so on. I realized the limitations of the power of photography. And eventually that photograph started to gain a life of its own, was used in The Hague to indict and convict people of war crimes, and as recently as December of last year, continues to be in the news as there's currently a war crimes investigation happening here in Serbia. So one of the things that I've learned was about the power and the limitations of photography, and sometimes that we don't know when photographs will take a life of their own, and kind of, without question, these two pictures have gone off without any control of mine. People publish them and use them and make films out of them and so on, because they've reached kind of a different level of representation of political violence or of war crimes.
Did you know that Bijeljina photograph will be so important at the moment when you witnessed that?
I had no idea about the impact. I knew what I was witnessing. I had, unfortunately, earlier during the conflict in Croatia, been with another group of Serbian paramilitaries who had executed an unarmed civilian, and I tried to document that. I had a gun put to my head, and I was told if I took a picture, I would be killed. And I wasn't even allowed to document the aftermath. And I had made a promise to myself that if I was ever in that situation again and I was not able to stop the execution from happening, which sometimes you're able to do by your very presence of being there with a camera, I would have to make sure I documented so that there would be evidence. So when I was again, unfortunately, in the situation a few months later, and it was obvious that the Tigers didn't care that I was there because I was there with their permission, I was very deliberate to make sure that I would be able to come out with a photograph that would hold people accountable for their actions. But I was incredibly naive and disappointed, and had to be more realistic that at the time that photograph didn't fit American foreign policy or European foreign policy, so it was ignored.
How old you were at that time?
I was 25 years old.
And how?
I'm very old now, just in case you're curious.
I'm pushing,
Thank you.
as you can see. How was the negotiation with Arkan? How you contact him? How that looked like?
Well, those of you who have read about Arkan, or maybe some of you have met him back in the past, he was a very charming person who thought that he was always in control of everything that was happening around him. And during the war in Croatia, myself and Alexandra Bula, another co-founder of the Seven Agency, went to Erdut, where he was based, to ask to work with him to document what he and his troops were doing. And he said, no, you can't come with me, but if you want a portrait, I'm happy to do that for you. It was really more for Alex, who was a beautiful French woman, than me as an ugly American, but I was there. And so he gathered up his troops into a photograph, and right as we were about to take the photograph of Arkan, somebody handed him a live baby tiger that they had rescued from the Croatian zoo. And he liked my photograph so much it was made into, or his team made it into a poster, and so on. So when I saw Arkan
the following year in Bijeljina, I went up and reminded him that I had taken this photograph and asked to go with him as he was saying that he was there to liberate Bijeljina, Muslim fundamentalists, and he sent me off with a small group of soldiers, completely by random. Other journalists that were there went off with other units of the Tigers. And it was as simple as that.
Can you, how come that you went back and back to Yugoslavia and you spent almost 5 years?
I had been in Slovenia when they declared their independence, and felt that from Slovenia to Croatia, and then at that point it was very obvious to the journalists and the diplomats and so on, kind of step by step what would happen. Bosnia would be next. If Bosnia wasn't solved, Kosovo would be there, and so on. Perhaps it would be a wider war, and I felt very committed to seeing it to the end. But certainly by the first year of Sarajevo, when many colleagues were starting to be wounded and killed, as well as, more importantly, the civilians around us, and nobody cared. It was very hard to actually get work, because it's still a business to some degree. I would have to pay my own way to go places. Many journalists started to stop going, because they said, if the world doesn't care, why should I care? Why should we keep going? Why should we risk our lives for a story that nobody's paying attention to? And so when it came time for me to make that choice, I had to start to understand what happens when the photograph fails in its initial attempt to galvanize opinion, world opinion, political opinion, to change things on the ground, which was pretty much what was happening with Bosnia, to some extent, even with the UN interaction. And I realized, going back to simple high school studies, that one of the things that when I learned about the Holocaust was when Churchill and Roosevelt were asked, why didn't you do anything about the Holocaust? Their refrain was simply, well, we didn't know. We didn't know that was happening. And so I thought that if the photograph and the journalism can't have impact immediately, it at least should hold people accountable for their inaction. No way should Bush, Clinton, John Major, Tony Blair, et cetera, Helmut Kohl, and so on, have the excuse to say, we didn't know. Here it is. We were reporting it every day, and as technology improved, reporting it at times like Christian Amanpour from CNN live on television. So you can't say you didn't know. Here it is. And that became essentially my mission statement, to be able to do that. And then as time went on, I also started to realize that eventually the work that I was doing with my colleagues would eventually, if not in the region, certainly in the world, start to supply educational materials and so on with ways to teach what was happening. So there are multiple levels of the value of photography, and I think as you look around you, this is another very good example, not only from this region, but from around the world.
But we have, let's say, 2 points of view. On one hand, you visited after Bosnia 100 countries, you witnessed 3 Holocaust genocides. But on the other hand, we are sitting promoting a book about the peace where everybody said that we failed. So how to, I mean, what to do with that? What to teach children? What to say? How to give the hope to next generation? Because you said earlier that it looks like nothing really moved from that point. Only time passes.
True, time passes, but time passes, in our lifetimes, it's a lifetime. But in the history of humanity, it's a blip. So, yes, maybe this generation, the next generation is not able to take advantage of what happened historically. But as many of you know, when you talk about history here in Serbia, or talk about history in Bosnia, or history in Croatia, everybody brings up a different date, 1389, World War II, so on, that all represents their reasons for doing X, Y, and Z. But these are small little dates that hopefully that at some point, generation after generation, that there will be impact. And you see still bits and pieces of improvement. Of course, things are not as they should be in this region, but of course the region also is not at war. So that's a small benefit, not great, but also not so horrible. And you would hope that at some point when the generations that led these various countries into war leave power, the ones that will replace them will hopefully be slightly different and hopefully better.
You really believe in that?
I do believe in it, but it's a matter of degrees. But matters of degrees are the difference between somebody having a great life and having a life of struggle. So when you think about how many opportunities we have with the work that we do to impact people's actual lives for the better, I think the role of journalism has the capacity to do that, to even improve things, even just a little bit, of strangers that we don't know. And I think that has value. Is it where I want it to be? No, but we always are hopefully wishing for things that will be better. But the continued idea of us wishing together hopefully will have some effect.
You witnessed a lot of different wars, different continents, countries. What are similarities and what are differences? Is there real difference in between different wars?
No, I don't think there is. I think that my unifying idea that's behind mostly, or certainly I think everything that I have seen, is the concept of fear, the exploitation of fear, the idea of using fear of your immediate family, of your tribe, of your nation being hurt, eliminated, damaged by the other group, which is exploited through media, conversation, etc., will motivate any human being to probably do anything to survive. Not 100% every person, but I would say most people. When you look at Rwanda, when you look at Bosnia, and you look at other places, when you look at the rhetoric from the politicians, you look at the rhetoric from the media of the dehumanization of the other, that allows people to justify any action whatsoever. Genocide, ethnic cleansing, executions, children being killed. It doesn't matter. They're the other. They're not human. I need to protect my own. That idea of fear will motivate people to do anything. The idea of civilization is to not allow you to get to that point. Civilization is supposed to have rules that will protect you and protect your community and beyond from having to worry about that. But when that breaks down, well, you look to the historical parts of these exhibitions, and that's what you see. That is the result.
How much all the horror that you witnessed affected you personally?
I don't think there's any way to answer that question. We are all made up of our experiences. So I can't say how different I would be if I hadn't gone to Croatia, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. I don't know. It's part of me. I think that honestly, I can't say. There's no way to even venture it.
That's also one point in the book that is going through the book. As I felt, that all the people who are talking about it is that they were affected, like have post-trauma syndrome and things like that. That it's very hard not to be involved personally, not to be touched.
No, I mean, I can absolutely attest to having suffered from post-traumatic stress, like a number of my colleagues and so on, because of what I've witnessed. But in terms of the overall change of me going this way or that way down my own personal path, I don't know. But I think that in order for my photography to have impact on you, I need to be impacted by what I'm seeing. If my photographs are very robotic, without feeling, emotion, or so on, then I don't think they will succeed to creating a relationship with you as a viewer, that you will feel something, that you want to go out and vote differently, protest, donate money, think differently, teach your children differently, and so on. So without question, I am affected by what I'm seeing. I will personally take the time to break down, cry when I'm done working, because there's no point in me going somewhere and not being able to essentially be your eyes. I have to do what my purpose is, but for sure that there are times when you're just overwhelmed by what you've witnessed, or by what I've witnessed.
For me, there are two photos that could be like the symbol of the Yugoslav wars done by you. One is, of course, Bijeljina photo, but the other one is the one with raised faces. And it's even, for me, it's even more touching, the one without presence of people. Can you tell us more about that photo? I'm not sure. But it's in the book, for sure.
Which is the poster, you'll see it outside. It's the picture of a family standing together with their faces scratched out. And I think that this photograph is my most powerful photograph from the former Yugoslavia, but actually represents pretty much all conflicts that I've done. So the story behind it is that there was a family, a Muslim family, living in a suburb of Sarajevo called Alija. When this war started, Sarajevo was split. The family fled. After Dayton, Sarajevo was reunified. They go back to their home. They go to their home. This is the Fako family. That's the name of the family. The windows are gone. The electrical wiring is gone. The furniture is gone. The piping is gone. It's a shell of a home. On the floor in the living room is this family photo taken of the family 30 years before at a waterfall park near their home. What I find incredible about this picture, which going again back to this idea about dehumanizing the other, is the intricacy of somebody who spent time probably with a razor blade etching out each face, etching out the identity of those people, and then scratching it most likely maybe with a drill bit or something. The photograph is interchangeable. Could have been done by Serbs, by Bosnians, by Croats, Kosovars, Rwandans, etc. It is the ultimate kind of example of this idea what war is about, is to eliminate the other people. And that's what it looks like. And that's why I think that photograph goes above and beyond the conflict in Bosnia and represents humanity's inhumanity to man's inhumanity to man, women's inhumanity to man, and so on. It is how low we can go as human beings.
There is in a way, we are like dinosaurs talking about this media now, especially in a time where technology is so all over the place everywhere, and it's so easy to manipulate the photos. And how do you see the future of photography in your, journalist photography, when we cannot trust what we see, or we can? How to choose to whom to trust?
I think it's such an important question. We live in such a dangerous time. But I go back to 2014 when the war with Ukraine began with Russia. And the Bijeljina photograph was taken by a very famous Russian blogger. And he changed the caption and said, the tigers were actually Ukrainians, the victims were Russians, and broadcast that throughout Russia. Today, millions of Russians know that photograph as a war crime from Ukraine. It was then used as an exhibition in Moscow with the same caption. Now that's about 10 years ago. It's way before serious technology has existed. Today, we are in an even more dangerous place. So what is the result? What can we do? Well, the responsibility is actually your responsibility as consumers of journalism, and especially visual journalism. You need to know where these photographs are coming from. You need to know what the caption says. Is it correct? You need to look for more than one source. Slowly, through actions by Adobe and other media groups and so on, they're developing a system that will basically put a blue check by a photograph that will technologically connect a caption to a picture that doesn't allow it to be photoshopped and so on. But it's going to take a few years for that to take effect. So in the meantime, before all of us get tricked into World War III or something along those lines, or even less dramatic but still powerful, please be careful in what you share, please be careful in what you read, and go to places that you trust. That's where it starts. But this is very difficult, because at some point it will be, when people will walk into a room like this, they'll just say, this is all AI, and I don't believe any of it. And all of these stories, all of these people, all of their histories, everything will mean nothing, because nobody will believe them.
What is next for you?
Well, for me, I will probably return to Ukraine to continue my work there and to finish the film biography of a photo.
And how what do you think, what kind of education should be provided for younger generation in this department of photography? How to prepare them for, what would be your advice?
Well, I think that people have been saying since I started that photojournalism was dead, that nobody cares about photography. But I think today, actually, it's the complete opposite. All of you in this room are photographers. You're all publishing, whether to Instagram, to your family, to Facebook, Snapchat, etc. So the appreciation for the still image, I think, is even stronger than ever before. What often will differentiate people like me from you is that we are supposed to go and look at the world ethically, with integrity, to say what we're showing you is a truthful representation of what we're seeing, to have authorship. And I think that if that idea is given to the next generation to still appreciate visual photography with this idea of verifying and trusting your source, that there will always be a desire and room for work like this to have impact, to tell stories that need to be told. I think that certainly from 9/11, from an American perspective, the Americans learned that the world is very interconnected, and I think that's reinforced certainly for Europe, but a lot of the world now with Ukraine, that what happens in places that you might not have cared about or thought anything about actually can have impact on your life. You might not need to care about human rights or so on, but most people care about rising prices of energy and rising costs of food and so on. That's an impact. And that means that you need to pay attention. If you agree with what your government's doing, say so. If you don't agree, also say so. But we are connected, obviously, more and more. And I think that the visual journalism helps bring that to a reality.
Is there a place in former Yugoslavia where you feel at home, or somewhere else in the world except your home?
I think I often feel at home or temporary home, where I am, kind of when I have the ability to kind of immerse myself in a story and meet people and feel that I'm able to tell their stories and hopefully play a positive role. I think that is, for me, a good definition of home.
I hope that we will have opportunity to see you maybe in 10 years in some proper gallery, Belgrade gallery space or museum.
I do as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So do you have some questions?
Now, looking back, particularly in this region, we see a rise of revisionism. Despite all the pictures, despite of the evidence, what does this revisionism make with you and your work, actually? Now people are questioning that Bielina actually happened, or that these pictures are real, or the work of the ICTY, to which indirectly you contributed as well, is relevant and real. So your starting preposition was to say, I want to show what is happening so that politics can react, and currently we are in a phase of massive revisionism of what happened.
I think it's a great battle. I think that many parts of history have been fought. The Holocaust, of course, is denied by many people, but the proof often is going to the photograph. And I think that, again, it's this idea of educated people with proper backing, which is properly researched photographs that have been vetted. And I think one of the things that with the Bielina photograph, I don't know if you saw the Rolling Stone article, but even though it was analog and it wasn't connected to GPS and so on, they went and researched backgrounds of the places and interviewed other people and so on to try to create a non-refutable history of the picture. At this point, there's not much more that we can do, but it has to be done. But there are also going to be times when there are photographs that are not true, that need to also be shown to light and dismissed. And again, it's a group effort. But if everybody just kind of accepts the loudest voice in the room, it's going to be a problem, a very big problem.
You talk a lot about the power versus the limitation of a photo. I'm curious, have you seen that evolve or change over the years? Like, do you find that your work now has more weight given the way we view media or less? And is that motivating or discouraging? Or how have you seen power versus limitation change?
I think the idea of the power of photography still, in this sort of more quote-unquote digital age, still remains very powerful. I think it's very easy. I think the ambassador could probably speak to this more, but if you remember the photograph of the Kurdish child on the beach and the reaction from the German government, that's pretty incredible reaction from a photograph. Now, I'm not saying the German government's reaction was based just on that photograph, just like the US reaction to my picture was not just based on the photograph, but it plays a role. And photography cannot stop a war, photography cannot start a war, but it can play a role, a very important role in the communication. And I think that's worthwhile. And I think that we will see more and more, given that photographs now can become viral, which means immediately reaching millions upon millions of people. But for a photograph to have a life longer than a minute, 2 minutes, or so on, is important. And when it does that, then it really can start to change things. It's difficult for things to reach that level, given, I think if many of you probably don't know, that last year there were over 1 trillion photographs taken. So when your photographs rise above the pictures of your lunches and your cats and your friends and so on, rise above that kind of familial noise into a sphere where it's starting to have impact, then the potential is incredible.
I'm Ross Conroy from the American Embassy, and thank you for being here, and thank you to everyone involved in bringing this exhibition to Belgrade. My question is, you mentioned the importance of ethics in journalism and photojournalism in particular, and I'm curious, in such difficult circumstances in which people can be almost seemingly stripped of agency, how do you navigate this complicated question of consent to be photographed and consent to share stories? I'm sure it's something that you think about a lot, so I'm curious kind of how you navigate that in these difficult situations.
Thank you. It's very important. I think the education that's needed for young visual journalists is incredibly important, because many people, young photographers, have made very serious ethical mistakes because they haven't had the ability to go to school, to be trained. It's one of the reasons why the Seventh Foundation is now training, especially here in the Balkans, but around the world. Our mission statement is to train majority world and underrepresented photographers of G20 countries for free. And we've trained over 1,000 people in the last year, is to teach them how to navigate these particular situations. And it's almost a situation by situation. Many times, certainly in a number of the photographs that you see on the wall, things are happening, people's lives are in danger and so on. The photographer, most people don't even see the photographer. They have much more important things to deal with. But many times when there is an interaction at least for myself, between myself and a subject. People understand the importance of the camera, especially now that they're also documenting things for themselves. But they understand the importance of their story being told. So I would say, for instance, in Ukraine last year, if you remember, there was a bridge that was broken, and thousands of people were coming across this bridge, were being ethnically cleansed. And myself and my colleagues every day would be documenting them coming through. Maybe I would say one person out of 1,000 that I photographed said, please, no pictures. And as soon as they put their hand up, you walk away. But everybody else understood not only what was happening to them, but the greater picture that the world needed to know what was going on. And that we, the people with the cameras, as well as themselves, now they're participating in their own documentation, were incredibly important to ensure that not only their own government, but governments around the world were paying attention. So it's this combination of teaching this integrity, not to interfere, not to set things up, to photograph things as truly as you're seeing them, and then represent that to you as, this is what I saw. You know somebody's behind the camera. So photography is not subjective. Sorry, photography is not objective, it's subjective. You're witnessing my interpretation, but you have to trust me that that's what I'm showing you, that as soon as I put the camera down, the woman who was crying doesn't start laughing and going, thanks very much, and walks away, right? It has to be a real situation. But without this education, if more and more photographers make that mistake, not understanding how things work, we will break our trust with the audience. And then again, we'll be in a point where you're not going to believe the work that you see.
Maybe you can tell us more about organization and what are you doing and what is the mission?
Well, the Seven Foundation was established along with the Seven Photo Agency, which represents photographers, and the foundation was created to document and create media projects such as Imagine that wouldn't normally be supported by traditional media, allowing us to do this long-form education. At the same time, Gary Knight created the Seven Academy, the educational arm of the foundation, with this very true idea of acknowledging that democracy is contingent upon having a true and viable press that works. And part of that press is visual journalism. And often in places, specifically in majority world countries, often the press is not as free as it should be, and there's no education available for many people that want to study, that we were able to receive funding to create this mission statement of educating these photographers free of charge. So we are creating different courses that are taught now because of the world we live in, both hybrid, online, and in person. We have classes in Sarajevo. We have a school in Arles. We have partnerships with the U.S. Embassy here in Serbia and in Bosnia. We work with the New Zealand government to teach the islanders, who often are not taught anything at all about journalism. We taught a workshop last year in 9 different languages, including Kurdish and Arabic. So we have our own mission to try to make sure, as people like myself and Zia get too old, to go out there, that there has to be the next generation of photographers to take our place.
So education is the key.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
That would have been easier to just say that.
Do we have more questions? So,
great. Thank you very much.
You will have a chance to talk in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mia and Ron. Thanks to all of you for your contributions. Now you're invited for a reception. Take your time for photos, but also stay with us with some snacks and drinks outside. And the exhibition now is open until April 5th from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. And there will be also guided tours on Saturdays on the 25th and the 1st of April at noon. So forward this information, and again, have a nice evening. Thank you.